I was real good friends with Mr. Petty. He helped me when I was a youngster with my Hemi, because he had won the Daytona 500 in a 1954 Hemi Coupe. And so he knew something about how to keep them together. And I had a lot of trouble with my Hemis at first. I couldn't keep rod bearings in them. So I got the number from the operator. The operator had to get the phones in those days. And I called his shop in Level Cross, North Carolina. He was on a party line, and he picked up the phone. And I said, Mr. Petty, I'm Don Garlits. I have an engine just like you won the Daytona 500 in, and I'm having bearing trouble. Can you help me? He said, do you have a pencil and paper? I said, yes, sir. He said, write down these numbers. And he gave me the size to turn the crank pins, the main journals, and how much to hone out the cylinders. And then he said, what kind of oil do you use? I said, Pennzoil. He said, that's a good oil. Where do you get it? I said, the gas station. He said, you can't get the Pennzoil you need at the gas station. You got to go to the distributor and get 60 weight airplane oil, and then you won't have no more trouble. And I didn't, and we were friends forever. I spent 16 days in Vietnam with his son Richard. The Petty family are real people. They're just everyday people. They never got that uppity deal, you know, and they better than anybody else because they were so good. I mean, they were the best. Believe it or not, Lee Petty actually ran moonshine at one time in his cars. And he built a lot of engines for his buddies. I built a lot of engines for moonshiners in my early days.
I hauled a lot of it.
Yeah. Anyway, Lee Petty built this for his high school buddy, Fred Cox. And then when Fred Cox died, he left it in his will to Richard. And Richard called me up. He said, you know, my museum is about NASCAR. He said, you were such good friends with my dad, you really ought to have this car for your museum. So here it is. I'm really proud. It's all old school. It's just an Oldsmobile engine, blown. It's got Pontiac gauges in the dash and all. It's just the way we used to do it back in the old days. And then I was up north about 15, 20 years ago, and there was this two-door sedan for sale. It was a four-cylinder 32 Ford. And I kind of liked it, and the guy only wanted like $12,000 for it, so I bought it. And we brought it back here, and we made an old-school hot rod. We used to love these Buick engines because it would go in here, and you didn't have to cut your louvers. And not many, you couldn't put a Hemi in here like that, so you couldn't have these panels. This has got a regular 39 Ford stick shift transmission. It's got the 41 Ford rear end. It's got hydraulic brakes. The only difference between this and the way we used to do it was this has got disc brakes on the front and a 12-volt alternator. So that way it starts every time, it stops every time. And this is a really special car to me because this is a recreation of my car when I was 18. The original car was sold and it was destroyed in a head-on collision in Alabama. And so it was we couldn't do anything with it. So I found this car. It was a really raggedy old 40 Ford, and I thought this would be a good one to change over to what I had. What we used to do, we take all the badges and moldings off. We take the running boards off. It's got 50 Cadillac tail fins molded into the rear fender. It's got Lincoln Continental spare tire. It's got 50 Chevy bumpers. And of course, it's got the Cadillac overhead valve engine, which was the engine of choice for the moonshiners. Yeah. And so that's what all of us hot rodders wanted. If the moonshiners used them in their tankers, we knew they must be the best. And so that's what we had. And I've driven this car a lot of places. I took it to the big show in Louisville, Kentucky a number of years ago. It's a nice driving car. Right behind you is a rare car. That's a 1948 Ford limousine. He only made 3 of them. And believe it or not, I found it in a garage not 25 miles from here. And the problem with these cars was it was really expensive to build because this is a Ford convertible and this is a Ford 2-door sedan. They took the 2 cars and cut the backs off them and the front off them, and they made a special piece of frame, and then they built a door, and they made the door with a wooden frame. Well, in a few years, the wooden frame fell apart, and the cars weren't very good anyway because they weighed 5,000 pounds, and the little 100-horse engine just wasn't really enough. But we took care of that. It's got a Chrysler Hemi in it, 250 horse. It's got air conditioning. It's got a torque flight transmission, and we built all this right here in our shop. We made the doors out of steel and put Lamont latches on them. It's a really, I use it for like graduations and weddings, and they just love to ride in this whole thing. These are some recreations. I told you that Swamp Rep 1 had a lot of different looks. Now that's how it looked the first time to the drag strip. And boy, did it run good. It won the top eliminator the very first time out. It was a long time before anybody had anything could even come close. And then this was the way it was modified toward the end of 1956. And why I painted it purple, I'll never know, but it was purple. And then we converted it to the one that's not here that outran the Cook and Bedwell car. And then this is how it looked when it went 176. And these are the actual tires that went 176 miles an hour. That's the only thing here that's absolutely original. And what happened, I sold those tires to an airman. And he took them over to a friend of mine's house in Tampa. The guy had a house that was built up on stilts. In 1990, he called me. His name was Obie Thayer. He said, how would you like to have the tires back that went 176 miles an hour? I said, do you still have them? He said, yeah. He said, that airman you sold them to left them here with me for keeping, and I don't think he's coming back. So, 1958 to 1990. So I got the real tires. It still has, on the inside, you can see the chalk marks, 12828 Nebraska Avenue, where they've been shipped to me from Oakland, California. And of course, that's the way the car looked when it went out of service in 1962. And the way you see it here, it went 204 miles an hour. And there's a lot of original parts here. This is the original #1 Enderley barn door injector. He finished this up on a Thursday night, and Bakersfield starts the next morning, the U.S. Fuel and Gas Championship. And he wanted me to run the injector, but the scoops had not been finished and were not back from the foundry. So Ken Enderley, the owner of Enderley Injectors, personally went out into the shop and built this scoop. He cut a piece of aluminum out with a mill, welded it all together so that I could run this injector at the U.S. Fuel and Gas Championships in Bakersfield. And it never got away from me. Also, it's got the intake manifold on it with the port injection that I ran from 1959 to 1962 on this car, and nobody ever knew it was on there. It's all hidden underneath. It would be 1965 before they realized that I was running port injectors. Ken Enderley came here when we put him in the Hall of Fame, 10 or 15 years ago, and I showed him this scoop. I said, Kent, there's the scoop that you built for me that Thursday night. Do you remember that? I mean, it was up till 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, oh my God. He said, I can't believe that you still got that. And the tears run down his face. it was really an emotional moment. You know, to see something that you built that you thought was going forever. Anyway, this thing runs really good. I took it to England in 2015 to the Goodwood Festival and made burnouts in front of the grandstands. This is another rare car. They made 107 of these cars. Very few people have ever seen them. The car was shipped to the dealership with this glass hood, so you could see that this is a 54, the first year of the overhead valve, and they have a light underneath there, and you could sit in the dealership showroom, and the light would turn on, and you could look at it and see the overhead valve engine, but you could still see how nice the car was. But the car came with the real hood, which they had in reps. And when the car was sold, they're supposed to put the real hood on it because this is not weatherproof. We don't know how many got out, but it wasn't too many. But this was, the lady that had this car was in California. Of course, she's an old lady. She is the original owner, and she must have been a good-looking young girl at the time she bought this car. And she got it with the glass hood. And this car's got 17,000 miles on it. It's only been in California. All this is original. And on top of that, it was a Sunliner. Most of them are just regular two-door sedans and stuff. But in California, because of the sunshine out there, they sent a real special one out there. And a friend of mine heard about this car. He said, you really ought to try to get this car for your museum because they're really rare. And years ago, I saw one in Hemmings Motor News. $60,000 they wanted for it. And that's the only one I've ever seen. And the lady took $25,000 for this car. And I tell you, I couldn't get it fast enough. And I have a friend in California, he took his trailer, went right up there and got it. But, and it naturally was always garage. Of course, in California, they're nice and dry. It's the best place to find a car. And I mean, we're so fortunate to have this because I'm really I'm a Chrysler guy, you know. I love Chryslers and I've been with them a long time. But I got my start in Ford. And it was so funny because I was so disappointed when this particular engine is 239 cubic inches with overhead valve. And it ain't as fast as a flathead. And we could outrun these cars with just our 52 Fords and our 53 Fords, you know. And we were just so disappointed in Ford, but they soon fixed that. They went to 272 and 290, you know, and they brought the cubic inches up and it ran pretty good. So it's a beautiful color too. I really enjoy it. Engine out of my 2009 dragback car, the white car, right over there in the lineup. This is number 1. This is the matching serial. That car is 2009.001, and this is the 001 engine. So when I got that car, the first thing I did was take out the number 1 engine and set it aside because I'm probably going to blow a motor up because I'm going to race the car. And I got another motor for the racing. Well, I never blew it up, so the motor never went back in the car. And finally, I put it on a motor stand. And I start it once in a while. I won't start it here. It's real noisy. You can't hardly stand it. It's as noisy as that fuel motor. But over here behind you, this is a 1975 Swamp Rat 21. It won the Winter Nationals in Pomona in 1975. And I took this car to England in 1976, and it set the British land speed record at 232 miles an hour. In other words, this car was the fastest anybody had ever been on British soil in 1976. And it was in a museum down in Sarasota for many years. It was really raggedy because it wasn't air conditioned. So we just finished going through it. We redid the frame, redid the chrome, and it's going to go to England now for 10 years. They're building a big fancy motorsports museum at Santa Pod, and they won't have this car on loan. So we're going to loan it to them for 10 years. This car here is a 1976 Swap Wrap 23, and this car didn't run for NHRA. That was the year I boycotted NHRA because they tried to cheat me out of the championship in '75. So when I won the big race in Ontario and I built this new car for '76, IHRA said, if you won't run NHRA in '76, we'll give you $100,000. You just run our races. So obviously I just ran their races. And this was on loan to a museum in Missouri, and it just came home. We're going to freshen it up, and it's going to go over to the Motorsports Hall of Fame Museum in Daytona for a 2-year loan. Behind you, this is a neat story. This is the Ruffalo Nen Gold car. This is 24 karat gold plating. This car was built in 1972. Gold was $142 an ounce, and there's $75,000 worth of gold on this car. And that's why the car has been saved. When they took it out of service in 1974, they intended to take it apart, take the gold pieces back to the plater, reverse the polarity in the tank, and put the gold back in the tank. And they have some way of telling how much goes back in there, and going to get paid for that. But the guy Ruffalo, Tony Ruffalo, in the meantime invented the carbon fiber racing bicycle wheel that became the standard of the industry, and he made millions. So he didn't need the money. And he had this big air-conditioned warehouse, so the car was stored in the warehouse. And about 15 years ago, he called me up and he said, how would you like to have the gold dragster? Of course, I remember because, very few people had gold dragsters. The Greek had one and crashed it, but this is the only other one. I said, what do I have to do to it? He says, nothing. It's just like when we left the track at Union Grove in '74. So they sent it to me, and we had it in the building for about 10 years. And then something happened, and I guess they were going to rent the warehouse out where it was stored, and the truck was in there. So they took the truck. It's also got gold wheels on it. They took the truck down to the tire shop. They put new tires on it, and then they took it over to the paint shop, and the kids comes out with the DA sander. They're going to take the signs off and paint it black. And Tony's standing there, and he says, stop! I can't stand it. He said, this is a custom truck. It shouldn't be destroyed. Maybe Garlits would like to have the truck. So he called me up. He said, would you like to have the truck? And they built that 4-door truck. That wasn't a 4-door truck to start with. They did all that. I said, sure. So they sent me the truck. But here comes the funny part. We built this big building, and there's a picture got in National Dragster. And the phone rings. And it's Tony. He said, do you remember the black trailer? I said, do I remember the black trailer? I said, don't tell me you still got that black trailer. He said, I do. I said, what kind of shape is it in? He said, it's like brand new. He said, it's been in an air-conditioned warehouse all these years. I said, oh my God. He said, if you'll put it in your big building out of the weather, you can have it. Now here's the story on this trailer. This is the first big gooseneck trailer in drag racing. When they pulled into Union Grove, and it was for the Olympics of drag racing, that's May 1972, Perdome, the Greek, Coletta, and Garlits were all there in our little tag-along trailers. That's the ones with the bumper hitch, And you have those funny bars to take the weight and everything. I'm sure all of you know what I'm talking about. And I had a camper, and the tools are in the camper, and you put the tailgate down, and open the toolbox and get your tools out and go over and work on the car. But we didn't work on the cars very much, you know. Mostly they were worked on at the motel or at the shop. So anyway, we're all standing up at the starting line looking at the track, getting ready for the big Olympics. I went to that race for 30 years. And here comes this trailer. It has to drive right by us. And I'll never forget, Perdome says, "What the hell was that?" I said, "It looked like a garage on wheels." He said, "Let's go check it out." So they go way down to the, anybody here familiar with Union Grove? Well, there's a big long horseshoe, and you go down to the end and you push start to come up. So he's way down at the end. He don't get to pit up on the asphalt with the stars because this is a no-name. Nobody ever heard of him. So we all go down there to check this out. And this Tony, he knows who I am, but I don't know who he is. And he sees me coming. He says, "Oh, Big Daddy, come over here. We want to show you this trailer." I says, "That's what we've come to look at." I says, "My God, that thing must weigh a ton." "Oh," he says, "it weighs a lot more than a ton." No kidding. I said, "What in the world is this all about?" He says, "We are going to change drag racing." He says, "This big trailer has got everything. We have a generator. We have an air compressor. We have our own lights. We have an awning. If it rains, we can put out. We have our big lights so we can work on it at night. Our toolboxes are on rollers. They're strapped down. We bring our toolboxes right out here to work on our car." I said, "Tony, we can't use anything like that." He wants to build them for commercial. I said, "The Greek and I, we'll run Wednesday night over here, and then Friday night over here, and then Saturday night somewhere else, and Sunday somewhere. We can't be dragging a big trailer like this." He said, "But Don," he said, "think of the convenience of having to work, a place to work on your car." I said, "If we have to work on the car, we just work on in front of the motel. We run an extension cord out of the motel." You know, the motels were different then. He said, "Those days are over." I said, "No, they're not." I said, "Nobody's going to want to buy one of these things." And he got mad. He said, "Big Daddy," he said, "you're the smartest guy on this whole planet about a top fuel dragster. But you don't know shit about working on your car." I said, "We don't work on the car at the track. We work on it at home." He says, "No," he says, "you're going to have to work on them in the pits." He says, "It's coming to that." He says, "You will live to see the day that everybody's got one of these trailers." And he says, "It wouldn't surprise me if even you don't get one." Well, it was 1975 and I had mine. But to think, I mean, it didn't even have a serial number on it. See there? That's where the state came and stamped the serial number on it with a police guy right here, so this thing could be titled. They only just pulled it from Racine out to Union Grove and back. It's only ever went, see? And they probably just had some kind of a dealer tag or something on it. But, and the hitch is all straight. They had to come here and take the hitch out of this truck. They took it north and put it in a new Dodge, hooked the trailer up to it, brought it down here, then put the hitch back in this truck, and we put it in here. Of course, we have it all inside because we don't want anything to happen to it. I mean, this is number one. This is what started the whole thing. And here's the kicker. Well, I was talking to Tony. Perdome had run to the payphone and was calling California to get somebody to build him one. Let's go start a couple of these engines. It's also got a cast aluminum oil pan on it, a single throat carburetor, and a very strange way the fuel pump push rod pushes up against the diaphragm. This engine got 31,000 miles on it. It came out of a 1932 Roadster that I found in Seminole Heights. It's a suburb of Temple where the rich people lived. It was sitting in a yard and they had a for sale sign on it, and I actually gave $6,000 for this Roadster with 31,000 miles on it. I thought, I'm just paying way too much. This Roadster should have been a museum piece. Of course, I took the motor right out and put a small block Chevy in it. It's 1970 and nothing, we wasn't thinking about, you know, museums and stuff like that. But I didn't throw the motor away, I kept it. And about 10 years ago, I decided I want to see what's inside of one of these 32, the real original motor. And I took it all apart. I got me a gasket set. They were just like brand new. And there's a couple of real interesting things. It's got a steel billet camshaft in it, not a cast cam. And each one of the lifters has got a tiny pinhole in the center of it so that the oil drips down through and oils that lifter going around on that cam. Also the bearings, all the bearings have got big cross things in them to allow the oil to get all around the bearing. They soon found out that wasn't necessary. And in fact, if you had trouble with your 32 Ford with one of these original motors toward the end of the year and you went back to Ford and complained, they just put like a 33 motor right in it. So these engines, there just aren't many of them around. So if you're restoring a 32 Ford and you want to compete in the AACA, American Automobile, Classic Car Association, you have to have a real 32 Ford. And the block is a giveaway. The petcock that drains the water goes straight down. And this is the only version. As soon as they change the engine a little bit, it comes out on an angle. So the inspector just looks down there. If that petcock ain't going straight down, you're out. This engine is worth well over $50,000 if somebody needed it to make their 32 Ford perfect. Of course, I would never sell it. I like it. And it only makes 65 horses. And it's so cute. I just love to start it up. I've got no mufflers on it. That's just running right out of the header. 65 horses. My dad, didn't like V8s. He says that the pistons laying on their side like that would wear. A lot of people thought that, He was a 4-cylinder guy. But the old lady next door, she had a 4-door sedan 32 with a V8 like this in it. And I could hear that thing start up and I knew it was running. I'd run over there to see it just drive out the driveway. And she was so cute. One day I went over there and she had a half-bushel basket. It had a great big rattlesnake all coiled up in it, but the head was smashed, And I said, Granny, what are you doing with that snake? She said, I'm taking it into Tampa. There's people that buy these snakes, they eat them. And I said, Granny, where did you get it? She said, it was in my garden. I said, how did you kill it? She said, I killed it with my hoe. I said, Granny, them snakes can, my dad says them snakes can strike the length of their body. She said, I ain't afraid of no rattlesnake. She was a tough old lady. She said to me one day, she said, you're a smart boy, Donnie. Said, you're gonna go places in this world. So just remember one thing, said, everybody that you climb over going up the ladder of success, you got to come back by them on the way down. Nothing, because it had to run against, it was modified, so it had to run against coupes and sedans, earlier model cars that were lighter. So I got me a 36 Ford, and I took the motor out of my 50 Ford and I put in the 36 Ford. I have over in the building is a replica of it, the Channel 36. And that would run 15.5 seconds. I could win my class, but I couldn't win top eliminator. So I bought a Roadster. So I took the engine out of the 36 and I put it in the 27T Roadster. And then I won my first top eliminator at Lake Wales against Charlie Hogan. Well, then I saw where the Californians were taking the bodies off. Dick Kraft took his Roadster body off and he had a dragster. So I took my body off and I had a dragster. Well, I won the big race at Lake City like that. They had the Southeastern Regional Championships at Lake City, Florida, August 1955. I went up there and I won the race. And I was the only guy in my club that won anything. We had a little club called the Strokers. So at the next meeting, they had taken up a collection of all the members. They bought a little tea set for my wife and I, commemorating the win. And the president gave me the tea set and he said, "I guess you'll retire now." And I said, "Why would I do that?" He said, "Because you will never beat the California." 2 years almost to the day, I put the wheel out in front of the Cook and Bedwell car at the World Series. But then I got the Chrysler engine, and this engine was no longer necessary. So I took it out of the dragster. I took the pan off and checked all the bearings, made sure they were all good, put the pan back on with a new gasket, and I put it into a kid's 1932 Essex Coupe, and he drove away. Now the moral of the story is, this one engine was in my 50 Ford, and I drove back and forth to work in it, was in my 36 Ford, which I drove on the street, and then on my Roadster, which I also drove on the street, and then on my dragster, and then it went into a coupe and became somebody's passenger car engine. Drag racing wasn't expensive then, and that's why poor people like me could do it, and it really appealed to us. Now this thing is, I love this thing. We have big truck fans on all these engines, and that thing's like a propeller. It's got enough push to move the whole car. But this is the final engine of the story. And this is the Arden, just exactly the way that Arcus Duntov meant for it to be. Arcus Duntov, everybody knows who that is. The Duntov Cams, Chevrolet, the Corvettes, that's him. He's in our Hall of Fame. He was actually here at the museum before he died. He made these hemispherical overhead valve kits for trucks. This is for heavy duty trucks. Like you have a big gravel truck, you need these aluminum heads, because if you're going up a grade, you'll heat up. Field in 1965, and it was runner-up in the consolation race, but the 392 cars won everything. And I won the whole thing. I won the overall race with my 392 Swamp Red 6. I come back to Tampa, and my boss at Chrysler says, "We want you in that 426 car." I said, "Well, Swingle's doing a good job." He said, "Swingle is not going to tune the car." He said, "This is a better engine, Don. You've got to get it in there and take it on tour." So I put Windjammer on the side of it, took the Swamp Red 8 off, put Windjammer on it, and out I went. Karamacinas was my big match race guy. He beat me 23 straight rounds with his 392 to this 426. He was the fastest guy in those days. And I tell you, it was embarrassing. And so finally, it all came to a head at National Trails Raceway, a track outside of Columbus. I went there as a match race with Jim and Allison Lee on a Saturday night. I won the race. I had top speed, 190, low ET, 813, and I won the race and made all 3 runs. I was supposed to get $1,250. I go up to get paid, and old man Radar, Clark Radar Sr., he's long time dead, was waiting there at the desk to pay me. And he shoves $500 across the counter to me and puts his hand over on a .45 caliber service pistol. And he says, "Garlits, you lay down on me tonight. I'm cutting your money." I says, "What are you talking about? I won the race, I made all 3 runs, and I was top speed and low ET." He said, "You didn't run 200. He said, "I advertised 200. You made a fool out of me. Take your $500 and get out of here and don't ever come back." And he moved the pistol, pointed it straight at me. I said, "You don't have to worry about me ever coming back. I'll never be back." And I never went back till he died. And so he said, "You're saving it for tomorrow. You got a match race over in Rockford and you don't want to work on it tonight." Well, we didn't like to work on them at night. He was right about that. But we wasn't having any trouble with this engine. It just wouldn't run. So we're on our way to Rockford, and I tell the kids in the truck, I said, "We're going to blow it up tomorrow at Rockford, try to make it run a little bit better. And then we're going home and get the 392 parts, and we're going to give the Chrysler deal up." And the kid says, "How are you going to blow it up?" Says, "We haven't even put a rod bearing in it all year." I said, "I'm going to put some spark lead in it." "How much spark lead you going to put in?" I said, "I'm going to put 40 degrees. "Oh, that'll do it." See, we only could run 34 degrees in a 392. If you put 36 in it, it start to hurt it. If you put 40 in it, only make 1 run, and the cylinder walls all be split. Run good once, and that's it. So I put real carefully with my buzzer, I put the 40 degrees in it. Oh my God. 213 miles an hour in 7.51 seconds. We rushed back to the pits, we jacked the car up, we pulled the pin down, want to see how bad it's hurt. We've got to make 2 runs to get full money. We're hoping it'll be not hurt too bad and we'll be able to make 1 more partial run and get paid. Because I already had my money cut from the night before. The oil looked brand new. There wasn't any water dripping out. And they run a rod bearing down. I was screwing the plugs out, looking at the plugs. They looked like they just been driving down the street. And they hand a rod bearing up to me. There ain't a mark on it. We put that thing back together. Didn't even change oil. Just put the pan right back up. And I took the mag, I loosened the mag, and I just did like that. I put 12 more degrees in it when I checked it later. And now I had 52 degrees. This SOB came to life. 219.84 miles an hour in 7.31 seconds. It would have been world records had it been on decent clocks, but they didn't like the clocks at Rockford, you know, but it didn't make no difference. We ran 220 at Indy and won the race in 6.77 seconds. The 426 was a better engine. We just didn't know how to tune it. And it was so funny. The next time I showed up, I was going to race the Greek at Milan. This was before Indy. Oh my God, it just... He said, "What did you do to that thing?" I said, "I put some sparkling in it." He said, "Would you give me the guy's name at Centerline? I want to get me a couple of those engines." Even Keith Black, this is another funny thing. On Monday, Keith Black called Centerline. I mean, the word spread like wildfire about this run. And Keith Black said to the Centerline parts manager, I want to be the West Coast distributor for the 426 Hemi. What do I have to do? And the guy said, you heard about those runs that Garlits made yesterday? He said, yeah. And he said, somebody said he didn't even hurt anything. And the guy said, that's right. It's a better engine. And they said, so Black says, what am I going to do about this dealership? And the guy said, you'll have to take a tractor trailer load of 426s. And Keith Black said, send them. He later built the aluminum version 426 with the Chrysler part number on it. My 66 Chrysler steamboat, I still got that they gave me in 66. It still runs too, but it ain't near as fast as this. This will run about 45 miles an hour. How many of you know who Smokey Unix was? Really? Like there's a Smokey Unix story?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Well, I was really, really good friends with Smokey, and it goes back a long ways. In 1959, I went to California in December and won the East versus West meet. I outran 9 California cars in one afternoon, never took the pan off, never had the heads off, and Out Crispin was the final one. And then when I outrun Out Crispin, they said, oh, there's one more guy who wants to run you, Chris Mercedes. He was sitting there waiting, and I outran him. It could have been live TV on in those days, because you didn't do anything to cars but refuel them. Anyway, I was so proud of it. It was my biggest win at that point. I got $7,500. And it was 3 days before Christmas. And we set a record that I don't think's ever been broke. Art Malone and I left Los Angeles, and 54 hours later, we were in Tampa. And there wasn't any interstates. But the Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, there was no speed law on the open highway. And we would hold that Cadillac at 100 miles an hour. And I had a mechanic's lien title on that Cadillac. It was built for the moonshiners. And it had an engine in it that would sustain 100 miles an hour. It had lots of clearance and everything, and 60-weight airplane oil. Anyway, right after the first of the year, Smokey Unix was like a hero to me, because he always is doing all this weird stuff, and was always in trouble with NASCAR, just like me and NHRA. So I loaded my trailer up, hooked it up to my Cadillac, and I drove over to Daytona Beach, to the Smokeys Garage. And I went in there, and I said, is Mr. Unix here? A lady behind the counter. She said, he's right down that hallway, that first door that's open. That's it, go down there. So I went down there, and he was at his desk working. I knocked on the door. He never even looked up. He just said, come in. And I went in there, and I said, I'm Don Garlits. And he looked up, and he said, I've heard of you. I said, I just won a big race in California. I beat every California car that they set out on the strip. And I won $7,500, the biggest purse ever been paid in drag racing. I come to show you my car. He said, I'd like to see that. And he got right up from his desk, and out we went to the car. And it's sitting on a homemade angle iron trailer that me and my stepfather had built with a buzz box. And the Swamp Rat 1 is sitting on it, and that was built with a buzz box. And Mr. Unix walked around the trailer, and he looked at me and he said, it looks like to me you built the car and the trailer with a buzz box. I said, I did. I still have it. That's over in the antique building, that little Lincoln welder. He said, what do you tow it with? I said, this Cadillac. He said, where do you keep the parts? I opened up the trunk, and there's a 392 short block and a little small box of tools. Like I said, we didn't work on them much those days. And I always ran a happy motor. And by that I mean, my motor wasn't burning up when it goes into the traps. In fact, when I made the 323-mile-an-hour run at Gainesville, I drove another 200 feet under full power. And I'm the reason they have that electronic stuff that shuts them off at the finish line now. My computer wheel speed, we have a computer on the front wheel, indicated when I lifted I was traveling 340 miles an hour, and my motor wasn't even hurt. I could have kept on driving if I wanted to. I always ran happy motors. So anyway, he looked at those parts, and he looked at that Cadillac, and he shook his head. And he said, "Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back." So about 10 minutes later, he comes back out of his office, and he's got a business envelope, a used one. And on the back of it, he's got a guy's name, a telephone number, and Flint, Michigan. He said, "You and Art get in your Cadillac and drive up to Flint. There's a brand new GMC carryall waiting for you in your name." Now this don't sound like much now, you know, but in 1959, and you driving an old 50 Cadillac, and this is a brand new GMC carryall, I mean, this is something else. I said, "Mr. Unique, are you kidding?" He said, "I never kid." He said, "Anybody that can take a piece of crap like this and go to California and beat all those super guys in that fancy equipment," because he knew what was out there, "deserves a better tow truck." And Smokey and I were like this from that day forward. He ran the breakfast at the PLI show in Indianapolis for years and years, and I would always go just for an airplane ticket and sit on the front row and answer questions. And he knew he was going to die about 2 years before he died. And he just gave me carte blanche. I could go there and just get anything I wanted. I got his personal dyno. I got his gasoline machine that he made his own gasoline. Forced NASCAR to supply the gas. Nobody could make gas as good as he could make it. He had an engine rule. If he built your engine and you won the big event, the engine came back to him. It was his. So you couldn't keep this engine if it was a winner. Now, if it didn't win, he didn't care. He had a room half the size of this, just hundreds of engines with tags on them that won all these different races. I got the small block Chevy 265 that won the 1965 Darlington. I got the Hudson Hornet 1954 that won the Darlington 500. I got the shotgun motor that A.J. Foyt won Milwaukee in 1969. I got the Crosley engine that won the first Sebring. I got the big block Chevy that he got 600 horse so that General Motors could go Can-Am racing. And he told them, "You're wasting your time, it's too heavy." It was iron. So they just built an aluminum big block. It went Can-Am racing. I got the Buick Nailhead that he got 600 horse. Buick was going to go NASCAR racing, but they never did. But he got 600 horse out of a Nailhead. I got the engine. And a couple of years ago, a guy come through here and he's looking at all this stuff, come into my office. He said, "I see all this Smokey stuff in here. You must have been really good friends with Smokey. Where's the Smokethron?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "You don't know what the Smokethron is?" I said, "No." He said, "I thought you was really good friends with Smokey." I said, "I thought I was." He said, "I'll tell you what the Smokethron was." He said, "That's a special dyno that Smokey built, and he put the NASCAR engine on it, open up the throttle, full throttle, but you don't turn on the ignition. An electric motor turns the engine up to 8,500 RPM, and it measures the horsepower that it takes to turn it." And then Smokey would take the engine apart, make little changes, and try it again. And this machine would find a half a horse. Parasite drag. That's where the thin weight oil came from that we all enjoy in our cars today. Smokey discovered there was ways to build the engine, use thin oil, and get more horsepower. They're great big air cleaners, big oil filters, things that there was no rules about. I said, well, I never heard of that. 3 months later, the phone rings, and it's a professor at the Central Florida Community College. And they said, do you want smoky units? Smoke them. We're not going to use it anymore. He had given it to the college down there. There it is, right over there. The big red machine against the wall. It takes 400 volts. So I called up Seco and I said, I need a new transformer out here. I need 400 volts. And the guy said, what are you going to do with that? I said, I've got this machine that's got a 200 horse motor on it. And the guy says, how many hours a day are you going to run it? I said, oh, I'm just going to run it once a month for my tours. They said, we ain't putting no transformers in for that. So, Donald moving the ton of bricks. Now, because this is a big group and it's not just run by the one guy, does anybody want to hear that story?
Yes. Yeah, I haven't heard it.
Okay. It's 1934, about March. I'm 2 years and 2 months old. My dad, the house burned down that we were living in, and my dad has built another small house, and he's going to put a fireplace on it for heat. That was very common in those days. And we were poor people. They were tearing some buildings down in Tampa, and he bought a dump truck load of used bricks. And the dump truck brought them out to the property, and my mom met the dump truck guy, and she wanted them brought over where the fireplace was going to be. But there'd been some rain, and the dump truck guy was afraid to leave the hard pan. It wasn't paved, but it was hard. And he was afraid to come into the yard and get stuck because it would cost at least $5 to get towed out and probably only like $3 to get the bricks brought out there. So the guy didn't pay no attention to my mother. She was young, 20 years old, you know, and women had virtually no say-so in anything in those days. It was incredible. And they just dumped the bricks in the road, which was about, not quite the length of, about half the length of this building from where my dad wanted them. So my dad come home that night, saw the bricks out in the street, and flew into a rage, had a really short temper. And he says to my mother, I can never depend on you to do anything right. And she's pleaded with him. Bill, I tried to get him to bring him up in the yard, but he wouldn't do it. Oh, he said, you just weren't firm enough with him. And then all of a sudden he went quiet. And when my dad went quiet, that meant he was thinking. Now, he had been an engineer for Westinghouse, and he was on the team that invented the electric iron and the electric fan. And he was real smart, especially with numbers. So he says to me, go get your little red wagon and meet me at the pile of bricks. So I run, get my little red wagon, and I meet him at the pile of bricks. He reaches in his vest, always had a vest. Looked at his pocket watch, put the watch back in his vest, and he gets 5 bricks, not real fast, just kind of slowly, puts 5 bricks in the wagon, walks at a normal speed over to where he wants them, stacks them up real neat, comes back through the wagon to the bricks, gets his pocket watch out, and he looks at his pocket watch to see how long that took. Puts his watch back in his pocket. Had a slide rule, always kept a slide rule. Took his slide rule, he's looking at it, doing this with it thing. He says, by now my mother's out there, and she's screaming, the baby can't move the bricks. And I didn't like that because the baby was my little brother, which was still nursing. I was not a baby. I never considered myself a baby. I always thought I was a big boy because I happened to be at the birthing when my mother had that baby, and I knew all about babies, and I certainly wasn't one of them. So anyway, that was a whole thing. That's a story all in itself. So anyway, my father never paid no attention to him. He just kept looking with his slide rule. And he said, finally said, if the boy starts moving the bricks when I drive out of here in the morning at daylight and stops moving the bricks when I come home at dusk, he can move these bricks in 7 days. And my mother said, the baby can't move the bricks. And I was already, in my mind, I knew my father was going to win the argument because she never won any arguments with him. I was already thinking about, I was going to build me a road and all to do it, you know. I moved those bricks in 5 days because number one, I put more than 5 bricks in the wagon and I went faster than my dad went. And my dad got me, we were, like I said, we were poor people, but he delivered vegetables in a real fancy section of town, Hyde Park. And the people put stuff out by the street for the poor people to come by and get, instead of, you know, taking them to a rummage sale or something. And he would always see all kinds of fancy stuff. He got me the nicest wagon you would ever imagine. It had a couple little marks on it, you know, but hell, I was going to put some marks on it myself. But it was one of those wooden ones with the high rails on the side. And I wore the little one completely out. One of the wheels came off of it, in fact, toward the end. But I didn't care. I just kept dragging those bricks over there. And that was the story of my life. Like the guy at the stroker, he said, you'll never beat the Californian. You'll never get a rear engine car to go straight. It's been tried 100 times. What makes you think you can do it? You'll never go 270 miles an hour. You'll never go 250 miles an hour. You'll never go 200 miles an hour. I mean, I've heard it all my life. And the minute they tell me you can't do it, it's just something clicks in my mind and it just sets me free. Also, he said, you're a master sergeant in the artillery. It takes a long time to become a master sergeant. That's true. I was 9 years in the artillery, but I was real smart with numbers and all. And I was chief of the firing battery, and I had to be able to do numbers because I had 6 howitzers that I had to deal with, and I had elevations and directions left and right. And the last 2 years I was a master sergeant of the 9-year hitch. But it did start to become interfering with the drag racing. Or I should say the drag racing interfered with the artillery. And they gave me a discharge. It was in the National Guard. And I got a business deferment discharge. But I was exciting. And of course, that had a lot to do with my hearing problem because we had no ear protection whatsoever. And we would fire 18 rounds when we'd fire for effect. And that's 18 times each. The 6 guns would fire 3 times each. And that did a lot of damage. And then he said something about the scouts is thrifty. Well, I didn't really learn to be thrifty from the scouts. When I was 6 years old, like I told you, we were poor people, but the neighbors next door were pretty wealthy. The man worked for Tampa Tribune. He ran the printing department. He was in charge of all the printing presses, and he was well-heeled. And they had a real nice horse and a stable. And one day he said to me, Donnie, he said, if you go down there and clean that stable out and put all that nasty straw out there in that pile, put fresh straw in there, I'll give you a dime. And so, a dime, that's a lot of money in 1938. Took about an hour and a half to do it. I had this shiny dime, and I run back over to the shop. My dad was in there, I'll never forget. He had a steel plate about that thick, big square, and he was straightening nails. And he'd have these jars with what the size of the nail was. And he straightened the nail. He never threw one nail away, straightened every nail and used it again. He was straightening these nails, and I said, I just earned a dime over at Mr. Eisler's. I cleaned out the horse stable. He said, give me that dime. Took the dime, he laid it on the counter. He reached in his nail pouch. He got 5 pennies and a nickel. He laid it on the little metal thing. And he took one of the pennies, he pushed it aside. He said, that's 10% of a dime. He said, now you take the 9 pennies, the 9 cents, and you do whatever you want to with it. Then he got a mason jar with a metal lid, and he cut a little slot in the top, and he put the penny in the slot. He said, that's the start of your savings. He says, you need to save 10% of all the money that you touch. And if you do that, you'll be a millionaire when you get old, because Social Security will never take care of you. And that was the start of my savings.
6 years
So
old.
that's 1938. We fast forward to 1942. My mom, and she divorced my father because he was a tyrant, no question about it. But it taught me a lot of things. And she had this new younger husband, which was more liberal. And they had a dairy, and they needed more cows. And a guy up in Georgia had 25 cows, and we could get them for $2,500. You want $100 a piece. They needed $500 down, and they were going to pay for the cows on time. And they only had a couple $100. They didn't have quite 500. And I had my jar. It was a bigger jar by now. It had turned into one of those pickle jars like on a bar. You've seen them.
Yeah.
And that thing was about half full of money. And we dumped it out, and there was $300 in that jar. And I loaned that to my mom and my stepdad, and they got the cows. And it's amazing what you can do when you put your mind to it.
Yeah.
But that's where the thrifty came from. I mean, I've always been that way. Like I said, we never bought anything on time, and always saved. I even saved today, and I know what I'm saving it for. I don't need it. Well, my truck is a 2001, but I like it. You know, I don't think there's any reason to get something new just for the sake of getting something new. If you like what you got, why don't you just keep it? You know, and we put a Hemi engine in that truck, and it's fast. I mean, it's me, you know. Oh, and he said, you're the healthiest 92-year-old I know. Any tip? Well, it's not really a tip. It's a lifestyle. I never drank. I never smoked. My father was a health nut. He believed in eating raw vegetables and not too much meat, and stay away from white sugar and white flour. In fact, on his envelope, he said, the whiter your bread, the sooner you're dead. It was stamped right on his envelope. And this was way before any of this was fashionable. And get lots of exercise. That's important. And you must exercise your mind as well as you exercise your body. And sitting in front of a television set is numbing your mind. You know, I can sit in front of a television set and I can go right to sleep. But I can lay down in the bed and I can't go to sleep because I'm thinking about stuff I want to do. And I just recently wrote the script for my movie. It took me about 3 months. And they like it. The movie company says it's a very good script. And I got that Screenwriters for Dummies, about that thick. I got the program for my computer. I did that. I wrote the book, Don and His Cards. I did all that on my computer. So I keep my mind working constantly, just as well as I try to do my body. In fact, I think my mind's in better shape than my body is. Because I got some knees that's giving some trouble. That's why it's hard to lift the legs. But I am not complaining. I'm so happy to be here. And I do enjoy this so much, with visiting with all you folks and telling these stories. All right, folks.
That score did it.
Got something to sign out.